Senator, thank you so much for calling into Breitbart News Sunday.
Happy to be with you.
So tomorrow you are going to be joining the president's delegation attending the opening of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Talk about the symbolism of that move.
Well, I just landed in Israel just a few minutes ago, and am honored and thrilled to have the chance to be here. It's on the 70th anniversary of the restoration of Israel, and it is a momentous occasion. You know, presidents of both parties have promised to move the embassy, and yet consistently they fail to do so. And I commend President Trump for following through on that promise, and I'm certainly honored to be here for this historic day.
Now, you've arguably been Israel's most prominent defender in the Senate. Why is this move so important to America?
Well, every other country on earth, our embassy is in their capital city. It's only Israel that was somehow treated like the red-haired stepchild. And that was wrong. And the move today to move the embassy and to acknowledge Jerusalem as the once and eternal and undivided capital of Israel, it sends a powerful message. It sends a message to Israel and our friends that America will stand by you. And equally important, it sends a message to our enemies that America will not be cowed by the global media elites. It will not be cowed by pressure from radical Islamic terrorists, that we are going to stand by our friends and stand up to our enemies. And I think we are seeing on the foreign policy arena dramatic improvements, because the simplest proposition and the truest proposition in foreign policy is that when dealing with bullies and tyrants, weakness and appeasement does not work. That the only thing that works is strength, and that is once again what we're seeing, a return to peace through strength.
So did you actually, be honest, did you actually think that you were going to see this day?
Absolutely. Unquestionably.
That's awesome.
During the presidential campaign, I campaigned all over the country promising that had I been elected, this day would have occurred the very first day in office, January 20th of last year. That I ultimately didn't prevail. President Trump prevailed. And so I've spent much of the last year and a half urging the president, urging the administration that this was the right thing to do. And there was a vigorous debate within the administration. There were voices that did not want to move the embassy, voices that believed that moving the embassy would make it somehow more difficult to negotiate some grand peace treaty in the Middle East. Now, I engaged very actively in that debate, and the case I made to them was, number one, I will confess real skepticism that peace is going to break out anytime soon. The impediment to peace is not the nation of Israel. The impediment to peace is Palestinian leadership that refuses to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, and that refuses to renounce terrorism. And as long as those two factors don't change, I think peace will be elusive. But whether that's right or not, what I urge the administration is the chances of peace go up if and when we move the embassy, because it will be seen by our friends and enemies alike as demonstrating American resolve, that we will stand up and follow through with what we say, and that makes it much more likely to make progress on every other front.
You mentioned the primaries. Now, you had a tough fight with President Trump, and even at times it got personal, but now it seems you're simpatico with key issues with the president. And in fact, he just gave you a big endorsement last week in Dallas. What do you attribute this thawing of this relationship between you and the president?
Well, we're working together very, very closely, and that stems from going back to the week after the election in November of 2016. I got on a plane and flew to New York and went to Trump Tower, sat down with the president, sat down with his transition team, spent 4.5 hours with them, where I told all of them the same thing, which is this is an historic opportunity. In the last 100 years, we have had unified Republican control of the federal government. a Republican president, Republican majorities in both houses 4 times in the last 100 years. This is rare, and we can't waste it. And I told them then, I said, Mr. President, I want to do everything humanly possible to lead the fight for us to deliver on our promises. This election is a mandate from the people, and we need to deliver on those promises. And that's what I have spent every waking moment, day and night, working to do.
One of those promises, of course, is securing our borders. Israel has proven the effectiveness of securing borders, security barriers, and whatnot. Is Israel a model the U.S. should look to in terms of national security and securing our borders?
Undoubtedly. One of the realities of Israel, when you are surrounded by enemies who would drive you into the sea, you don't have the luxury of indulging in nonsense when it comes to national security. You don't have the luxury of indulging in political correctness and ignoring the harsh realities of the world we live in. For Israel, borders are life or death. Borders are ensuring that innocent men, women, and children are not murdered by terrorists seeking to destroy them. And so there is a great deal we can learn on border security from Israel in terms of how to effectively secure a border, and for that matter on national security as well. You look at just over a week ago, Prime Minister Netanyahu relayed the results of an incredible Israeli intelligence operation where the Mossad captured over 110,000 secret documents from Iran detailing their 20-year-long covert program to develop nuclear weapons. That was incredibly potent and effective, and that discovery greatly benefits both Israeli national security, but also very, very directly American national security.
Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of Trump's agenda and getting it done, on Friday, you and many of your Republican colleagues sent a letter to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell urging him to expedite floor proceedings before the end of the fiscal year. In that letter, you and your colleagues offered to work Mondays and Fridays, even nights and weekends, even suggesting canceling the August recess. Is Congress broken under its current leadership?
Well, look, yes and no. On the plus side, as you look back at the past year and a half, I think it's remarkable how much has been accomplished. As we started 2017, I think the 4 big priorities were tax reform, regulatory reform, Obamacare, and judges. And of those 4, we've managed to bring Republicans together to unify the party and to deliver in a significant way on all 4 of them. Tax reform with an historic tax cut passed in December that's producing jobs and economic growth all over the country. Regulatory reform, we're seeing just about every cabinet agency lifting job-killing regulations. Obamacare remains the biggest unfinished commitment that we made. But it's worth noting that even on Obamacare, we did manage to come together and repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. I led the charge to do that. And 6 months ago, nobody thought we had a chance. We went from it being deemed impossible to, in December, all 52 Republicans standing together and delivering. And finally, judges. Judges are an unmitigated victory, whether it's Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court or an historic number of federal court of appeals judges being confirmed. So it's worth recognizing that we've delivered a remarkable amount. Now, that being said, that is not an excuse to let up on the gas. That is not an excuse to stop moving forward. And what I've been urging my colleagues is this moment in time of unified control of government, history teaches us this is rare. Let's not waste 1 second of 1 minute of one day. Let's continue delivering results, more jobs, higher wages, securing the border, protecting our citizens, protecting our rights. Let's keep delivering. And by the way, if we keep delivering results, that's also how you win in November, by turning voters out. And so I was happy to join with 16 other senators asking the majority leader, let's work around the clock to deliver results, because we have the opportunity to make a real difference for the country right now.
Has McConnell responded or signaled in any way that changes are on their way?
You know, this has been a debate that has been ongoing for the last year and a half and even longer. And so the letter is one of the latest back and forths. There is a divide in the Senate between what I would call the old bulls and the young Turks. And the young Turks is really kind of everyone elected 2010 or more recently. And the young Turks are consistently pushing, let's do more. Let's be in session longer. Let's put more pressure on the Democrats. If the Democrats are going to filibuster everything, which is what they're doing, let's make them stand up on their feet and filibuster. Let's use the rules to actually move our agenda forward. In other words, let's treat the promises we made to the voters at least as seriously as the Democrats treat the promises they make. Because, you know, when the Democrats are in power, they bend over backwards to ram their agenda through. Our leadership sometimes is much more passive, much more willing to accept, well, if the Democrats oppose this, we can't do that. And I think that debate is going to continue. I can tell you, I was with the president last week. The president emphatically agrees that the Senate needs to keep delivering results this year. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues to do that.
So on the topic of the filibuster, of course, you know, you voiced support in the past for killing it when it comes to Trump's long list of nominees. But do you support ending it just once and for all when it comes to just getting all of the items on Trump's agenda done?
Yes, I do. And I have supported ending the legislative filibuster for some time. I didn't used to. Several years ago, I would have said no to that question because I think historically the filibuster has proven to be a conservative tool. It's slowed down the growth of government. But what's changed, the reason I've changed my mind on this question is two things. One, the scope of the Democratic obstruction is truly unprecedented. It is across the board, virtually every nominee, virtually every piece of legislation. And number two, the Democratic Party that we've got now in the Senate is so radicalized that I no longer believe the filibuster would bind them. If the Democrats ever took the majority again, they would, I believe, immediately end the legislative filibuster. And so it doesn't make any sense for it to be a one-way constraint that binds only Republicans and not Democrats.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, before I get to asking you about your reelection campaign, I want to switch gears and ask a little bit about Silicon Valley. You've emerged, of course, as one of the leading critics of the liberal bias in Silicon Valley. What can social media companies do to make themselves more transparent? Should they be maintaining lists of banned or censored users that are subject to oversight, or should their algorithms be made public? What are your thoughts?
Well, this is an issue that I think is a serious and growing threat. The accumulation of power in a handful of giant tech companies, it is now controlling American media. The nexus of power in media has moved from New York City to Silicon Valley. And at this point, a handful of companies enjoy power that famed publisher William Randolph Hearst at the height of yellow journalism could never have imagined. If a tech company decides they don't like your views, they don't like what you're saying, we've heard reports from whistleblowers of shadow banning, where you simply tweet or post something and nobody sees it. It just goes into the void, goes into the ether, and you are silenced magically. Likewise, if there are views that a handful of tech companies like, they can favor those views and direct them to your feed, so everything you see is the information they want you to see. That is a level of power that is staggering, and I think it poses a real and present danger to our democratic system, particularly given the extreme left-wing bias of Silicon Valley. What we've seen over and over again, they're acting to muzzle and silence conservative views they disagree with. That's frightening, and I think we need to be looking at all the tools we have to protect free speech and prevent the internet from becoming a vehicle for censorship.
quick follow-up. Should these companies, since they are, as you said, making editorial judgments, should they be classified as publishers and not neutral platforms?
I think there is a very strong case to be made for that. As you know, when Mark Zuckerberg testified in the Senate, that was the question I led off with, was does Facebook consider itself a neutral public forum? And the consequence of that is, under legislation that passed a couple of decades ago called the Communications Decency Act, there is a section of that legislation, Section 230, that grants these tech companies immunity from liability. They can't be sued. And it's a special immunity from liability that nobody else gets. The predicate, the basis for that immunity from liability, was that they were neutral public forums, that they were not the ones speaking, but rather it was the people just speaking and posting on them. Well, if they're not going to be neutral public forums, if they're going to be active political speakers and favoring one point of view and disfavoring another, they have a First Amendment right to do that, but they have no entitlement to a special congressionally created immunity from liability that nobody else enjoys.
All right, Senator Cruz, thank you so much for joining Breitbart News Sunday.
Always good to be with you. God bless.